Started. Welcome to this special presentation of Ontoit's Leadership Talks. I'm Demetra Kohling, your moderator today. In this episode, we're going to explore key insights on implementing zero trust strategies in large enterprises. We have global leaders with us, Yuri Bobbert and Wilco Jansen. They'll share valuable insights that they learned in their remarkable 3-year collaboration implementing a zero trust cybersecurity strategy. They will provide some actionable lessons learned to help you navigate your own zero trust journey and perhaps even avoid some missteps. Today in the webinar, you'll see we have a Q&A section. So as we go forward, if you have questions, please just put them in there and we'll try to get to them during the conversation. Today we have Dr. Yuri Bobbert. He's a double PhD in applied economics and information systems science and a professor at Antwerp Management School. Importantly, he has 24 years of real-world management experience. Beyond being Ontoit's Chief Security Officer, he's a former global group CISO at NN Group. He led the merger of NN Group and Delta Lloyd's IT security, risk, and compliance function. And alongside Yuri, we have Wilco Jansen, who is a seasoned IT leader and strategist who has spent over 20 years at the forefront of digital transformation and technology innovation. His journey has taken him from the leadership role of CIO and user product at NN Group to his current executive position as Senior Director of Digital and Technology Workforce at Discover Financial Services. He's made significant strides in improving efficiency and driving change within complex settings. With a solid foundation in business informatics and information technology from Middlesex University, London, Wilco has a deep understanding of technology infrastructure, team dynamics, and risk management. So here we are with two global experts, and I'm really interested in how did you two meet?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you to have us here, Wilco, in the beautiful office in Houston, Texas, where, obviously now Wilco works at the Discover Financial Services. Shall I start where we met, Wilco, or do you want to take the floor?
I hope it's a shared memory, you know. I think it was in Portugal somewhere in 2016, 17, where we first really met, got to know each other and teamed up for a day, talking about basically anything there. Portugal is it's a great country to be. It was in Lisbon, so it's a great city to be, in a very vibrant environment where we're looking at all kinds of innovations and stuff. So this is where actually we spent a full day talking to each other, getting each other to know. We went back to the Netherlands and went back to day-to-day business and interacted on an occasional basis. But where we really met is the moment you sort of pull a, well, it felt as like a trick on us, but maybe you can tell a little bit how you set that up.
Yeah. Do you want me to tell it, Wilco?
Well, you can tell it, and I will say how I perceive the real get to know each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I think because it's also relevant for this entire session to explain a little bit on I was the global CISO for NN Group, so the Nationale Nederlanden Group, where Wilco was also responsible for the entire environment for workplace services. And as a CISO, you normally do red teaming exercises where you don't want to announce that too much to the organization. But you can imagine that for such a large enterprise, if you do such a big red team test and you don't announce it and it's completely silent and you do a very sophisticated one, then not all people are very happy with that, including Wilco. So I can remember that Wilco had some difficulties with not reaching the CISO during the event. He was trying to call me, and obviously I did not pick up the phone because I wanted to see what has happened and how people are responding to this event and if our official incident response process are actually working. So Wilco called me a couple of times, did not answer the phone. Then he called my boss, did not answer the phone as well. Then he called the boss of the boss, and then eventually it trickled down to me, and then people put pressure on me and I said, no, this is an exercise. We are not going to give up. We are going to stay there until Friday, 5 o'clock. And I can remember that Wilco was calling me and he said, trying to call me again, and he said, is this real? And I said, yeah, this is real. Yeah, but we're now going into the weekend, and now I'm going to make sure that all my people are working during the weekend. And then I said, okay, Wilco, it's a test. And Wilco completely flipped. But I must admit, after 5 minutes, she said, it's actually quite a good test, and this is also what we need.
Yeah.
And so this is where we really met, also where we really met our true passion for the profession, but also how we look at utilizing technology in an environment where basically Wilco is a pure technologist, and I got to know Wilco as somebody that's also looking at where can we get the biggest benefit out of the technology that we already invested in the company.
To tap into that, I was flabbergasted. Where is the CISO? We're being hacked, guys. We're going, and I was going crazy. And then finally he picked up and he said, yeah, it's a test. And I was like, damn it, I could have known, but yeah, these things can also happen for real. And I remember the timing at the time it was we were starting the upgrade of Windows 7 to Windows 10. And you talked a little bit about my passion for technology. And for me, that forklift upgrade with Windows 7 to Windows 10 was also the opportunity to not just do an uplift and lift and shift what you have, but also substantially improve everything that you have for the end user. And that's included security. And that's what we did, because I remember we just did 15 endpoints, and the endpoint telemetry notified that, hey, there's something going on in your infrastructure. So actually that was, looking back, we were like, wow, we already have the benefits from the transition and improving things. And this is where we started talking in more depth, and also shared our visions about zero trust and technology and securing technology in general. And we stayed in touch since then. So, yeah.
Well, what I've learned is I don't like red actions, especially, but I am also interested in how much you enjoyed it, Yuri. Spreading a surprise on people. Yeah. But I'm interested in what you just said about zero trust and how you started working toward improving that security when you were doing that migration from what was it, Windows 7
to Windows 10, yeah.
Right. I remember those days. So it's interesting to me. And I think it's important for us to sort of baseline a little bit. What is zero trust? What is a zero trust strategy? What are some of those key pieces that you all began to collaborate on? What is it?
Okay, so shall I give a small introduction also about, we have a couple of visions on zero trust. Well, everybody talks about zero trust. First of all, there is the product. Is it a hype? Is it a trend? Is it here to stay? Is it zero trust architecture, or is it zero trust technology? What is it? There's a lot of fuss about it. Well, basically, it comes down to, my opinion, is like eliminating trust that we inherently already built into the network over these years, because we have a lot of protocols talking to each other and a lot of interconnectivity between systems that, obviously, due to a better user experience, there was already trust in it, so that it can collaborate better. But in the end, that was not very sufficiently designed, because that trust was then misused by hackers. So we want to eliminate that trust out of the network, out of the users, or out of the entire environment, to make sure that users are validated and they have access to specific critical assets of the environment. So basically, there are a couple of things for zero trust. So one is, you need to know what's my critical environment, what's my protect service, what do I want to protect? That's the opposite of the attack surface, where we most of the time look at, okay, what are the attack patterns and attack actors that we might have? We're now looking at, okay, what is my critical assets or my critical chain that I want to protect? And then out of that, you're going to design your architectural principles. So if, for example, data from one protect service is going to another one, and we're here in the US predominantly also because of the events coming up for the Texas Banking Association, we are heavily engaged in the financial industry, where most of the time financial core systems like financial ledgers, core systems need to be protected. And the executive order from Joe Biden also said, well, you need to protect that with zero trust principles. We are looking at those protect services. for example, a financial system, and then, okay, who should have access to that system? And so what are the privileges that you want to give to those users in order to have access to those critical protect services? So that's one, the protect service. Identifying the flows going from one protection service to the other determines what kind of technology am I going to enforce in order to control that. And then, for example, multi-factor authentication comes in. We see a lot of our financial customers implementing MFA, and then, okay, this is our zero trust implementation. That's only a very small part. That's making sure that the users are verified and the authorizations of these users are also administered and they are having access to those systems. So that's just one part. We have multiple other technical security measures that you can put in place for zero trust. We can share that afterwards, by the way, after this event. We have 40 measures. We've identified 40 measures that are relevant for zero trust that you can implement based upon what do I want to do? Do I want to do extra validation here of the user? Do I want to, for example, implement cryptography, or do I want to do security monitoring? So these are all architectural measures that you should put in place on these protect services. And then after that, you're going to validate and you're going to inspect all the traffic going in and out, and if these measures are actually working. And then just one side note, this is, for example, also what we see is that MDR, Managed Detection and Response, is one of these measures that's most of the time proposed or advised, should have that. But to our opinion, that is not sufficient. It is only basically looking at what's happening in my environment, generates logs. You look at the logs, you see something is happening, but what then? Basically, you need more. You need to have the inspection, the verification if this is true traffic, if it's real traffic that you want or not allowed. On the other hand, you also want to make sure that if something bad happens, that you have capabilities in place to take action, to really start investigating and start escalating in case of something bad happens. Also during the night or during the weekends, because we also know that hackers most of the time become active when it's a public holiday or in the weekends. So that continuous validation, if the zero trust measures are working, that's also part of zero trust. That's not an MDR. Perhaps we can touch on that later on, but that's not an MDR. That's more in other technologies that we can perhaps touch on later. So those are the basic principles of zero trust.
Right. The lawyer in me often says that MDR is kind of like Exhibit A for a plaintiff. It's sort of a very good, long, detailed list of all the things you should have handled it and didn't,
Yeah.
or weren't scaled to handle, or didn't have the expertise to handle, or you bought a tool but you didn't implement the latest patch, and all of these things happen. So zero trust sounds like it's much more comprehensive than these just sort of the piecemeal solutions.
Yeah, I like the analogy, by the way, because you also see that in for example, when somebody is prosecuted or something bad happens and there is an investigation and there's not the security measures are not utilized to the fullest, or it was only paper-based, that companies are then penalized because they did it only on paper, but they did not actually implement it. So it's a good example.
Yeah, so for me, from a technology point of view, because you said I'm a little more on the practical side of implementing these things, and I'm working the past couple of years a lot in the end user domain. For me, it's always looking like where's the biggest risk and how do you eliminate that risk from happening using zero trust thinking and moving there. So what you see in a lot of companies still is that there is a boundary defense approach. So as soon as you're inside the office or inside the network, using a VPN or whatever technology you use for that one, you consider to be secure. One of the first things I'm always trying to do is take that endpoint traffic out of the data center. That's one of the biggest steps you can take by segregating that using zero trust mechanisms. And you see then boundary defense is still important. You know, you will still have firewalls. You need to do segmentation, which is very difficult in organizations to implement. But you think about these things, and you touch upon some of these things to implement them and make sure that you then build layer for layer for layer have the measurements and the telemetry there, because logging is one of the most important things you can do. I think the recent hack from Microsoft turned out that government institutions had extensive logging going on and found a hack within Microsoft based on the logging that was provided. So logging is key to everything you do. That leads to all the kinds of challenges. How do you consolidate that? How do you find those patterns of different behaviors, et cetera, et cetera? But yeah, we only have an hour, so probably we don't have time to go into these things. But that's definitely also something to take a look at, like have a strategy. And don't forget, it's not only technology, it's also attitude, it's behavior, it's education, it's training, it's actually the whole range of things that you need to do to make your company more secure.
Is one of the, when you look at a zero trust strategy and implementing it and how you did it at NN, what were some of the harder pieces of the strategy? I mean, you talked about define the protect surface. That's like, what is important in your company? What's your data? What are you trying to protect, right? So what's the key thing? I mean, those kinds of things, or was it having enough tools, having a big enough budget? What was sort of your biggest challenge as you began your journey to do this project at NN?
Well, I think for NN, NN is a typical environment like any other environments. So
by the way, just for the participants who don't know, it's a very large insurance company, and it is based in Europe.
Yeah, so it basically has an insurance company, an investment firm, a bank, pension, social securities, etc. So it's quite an extensive organization, 19 countries and multiple branches, 20,000 people. But in case of the what I refer to at the moment, we started with a data-centric cybersecurity approach, meaning that we want to protect the data regardless if it's in cloud or somewhere else. So data-centric, inspired by the Yuri principle already 10 years ago or something like that. And then Zero Trust was coming up, and we looked at Zero Trust. We were thinking, hey, this is quite a good approach, because then we eliminate the trust from the fact that the data is now everybody that has access to the data or can do something with the data needs to be verified. But then for me, from a personal standpoint, is that I had you learn the most from the things that don't work. You learn from your knocks.
Yes.
Like Nassim Taleb would say, you learn the best from the things that fail. And I failed miserably in a previous assignment that I did with another large corporation, where I basically said, well, this is my strategy, and this is how we should all do it. But in real life, people look at, okay, but you can mention that, but it's an ivory tower strategy. We're not going to do it. They tell you we're going to do it, but they're not. So we learned at NN is that you can do two things: have a strategy, but also leverage on what you have and what's already quite vital and good in the firm. And in the case of Nationale-Nederlanden Group, NN Group, there was already a very, very good structure in terms of risk management, audits, things like that. So if you leverage on that, that's one. And on the other hand, we had people like Wilco in the technology space that were really advanced. So then if you look at Zero Trust, you cannot start with, okay, we're going to start with identifying the protect service. Because people then really think, okay, but why do we start there? Where basically we have a burning issue in some foreign country because there's somebody playing around with tools. That doesn't make sense. So again, like Wilco mentioned, look at where's my biggest risk, but also where's my biggest opportunity. And in that moment, the biggest opportunity was to get rid of the decentralized security functions, because it was defragmented. People were doing all over the place. And you basically centralize traditional security services that the entire group can benefit from. So like, for example, the workplace services of Wilco. And on the other hand, the centralized security information event management system, the SIEM system. It doesn't make sense that Japan uses a SIEM, Poland uses a SIEM, and Spain uses a SIEM. That's all separate, because then you have a defragmented environment. And that's the biggest risk for any CISO, because then you need to run on all those individual issues. So basically you want to centralize that. And so if you leverage on that, let's say that movement already going on in the firm, that's one. And then, yeah, obviously you're doing that out of a zero trust perspective where you basically want to do that on the biggest issues. And in this case, we had an issue with the central, well, I'm not going into too much details, but the biggest risk was in end users having access to specific systems. And then the project of Wilco was basically the catalyst to prevent the biggest risk in that domain. So you're making use of somebody else's expertise by achieving that. And I think that's also when you're drafting like cybersecurity roadmaps or zero trust roadmaps, it doesn't make sense to completely reinvent the wheel. No, it makes sense to leverage on the expertise, on the people, on the culture, things that are already there. It sounds like an open door, but I see a lot of people also failing in that because they are having their own hobby horses put in front of that and they, oh no, we're going to do this. And forget that there are other good initiatives, like the initiative that you have with centralizing the SIEM function to, in this case, Microsoft.
Yeah, and that's a sensitive topic, you know, if you have a federated organization and suddenly you say we bring everything centrally, you know, it's like you take away my essence of what I'm doing. And I always said in those discussions, don't worry, there's enough work left for you, interesting work left for you to do, but breaking those barriers, it takes time. You know, the vision is there, the strategy is there, a mandate top down is there, but to your point, people sometimes are really deeply attached to what they're doing, passionate, most of the time very passionate, and getting them on board in the different way of thinking about security and security assets, that's tough, especially when you have to deal with so many different federated organizations, different cultures. You know, there's a difference if you work in Japan or in Spain or in Poland, just to mention the three that you mentioned. And so that's what makes the work also fun. You know, it's definitely not an easy road forward, and the strategy is a sort of North Star. We don't necessarily know exactly if we will end there, but that doesn't matter. Every time, if you can improve one part of your defenses and adapt to everything that's changing, because let's not forget, the landscape changes every day. The threats that are not there today are there tomorrow, or else the day after tomorrow. And it's an ongoing thing. So you need to build that resilience in your organization that is eager to absorb the change instead of a top-down mandate of pushing in the change. That's always difficult. And it's an open door, like you said. We all know if change is pushed into an organization, you get resistance. So how do you build that? Yeah, that's yeah, sometimes you're successful and sometimes you're not. Because you take a different approach on things. But this is what we've been trying to do from that vision. And it was not a big drafted document or something like that. We said, this is achievable within now and 6 months. Let's go for it. This is achievable within now and a year. And let's go for it. And then we've centralized and standardized things. And key thing is make sure that the things you build centrally are really good. That's really important. Yeah. Because if you build something which is a step back for those federated parts of the organizations, adoption becomes even more difficult. You know? So make sure that you have built an organization which can drive those change, where quality is actually, well, it's something which I also say in my current team, quality is actually non-negotiable. You should go always for the best achievable. If you don't go for that, sooner or later, you will always bite your own tail. And that's difficult because the transition you were talking about in that era, we had all our IT services outsourced, and we were transitioning the organization from a traditional service organization to an engineering culture, you know, introducing agile DevOps, thinking different about security. It was a massive change, fantastic to do. And I think we were pretty successful in the end. Yeah, but it took a couple of years to make some major steps forward. It's not an overnight change. It definitely isn't.
Was education a real big part of this? Because I'm thinking about the people you were working with in all of these countries and locally, and trying to achieve certain goals in a certain amount of time. How did you get everybody on board? Not only the people who were implementing, but your executive team, because going from a fragmented sort of everybody's in control of their own scenes, for example, in the various countries, and going to a centralized system must have been a very unsettling kind of thing for the leaders and the executives in the other countries. So how did you manage the education and the team building and getting people behind this idea to go forward and implement this, both at the upstream and downstream, you know, with your executives and also with the people who were going to be doing the work?
Well, the good thing is that we had the privilege of a excellent CIO, the Chief Information Officer, which was hired from ING Bank and completely transformed the ING Bank into an agile bank, and then went to NN Group. His name is Amir Rooney. He's also the former CIO of Discover, where we are currently at the moment. But the guy was so phenomenal in, first of all, I will always remember this, is that you can make 100% impact with only a small change, with only changing 2% in your infrastructure and then change it. Infrastructure, I mean, people's heads, technology, in the culture. If you change and you look at things that you can change very small, but have huge impact, then you can achieve things. And one of the things that I still remember is that he said, well, we need to do one thing here, that's educating not only our engineers, because we wanted to build an engineering culture, meaning that engineers need to understand security by design principles, for example. I'll give an example later on how we did that. But on the other hand, also the management board, supervisory board, so the entire leadership team of the organization. And one of the things that I'm a professor at the Antwerp Management School, so Amir also asked me, can you also ingest one of that expertise to these teams and do like what we call permanential education? So if you're a supervisory board or a management board, you need to follow specific permanential education points in order to have your role accepted as a supervisory board. So we basically incorporated their cybersecurity for dummies, cybersecurity for advanced people. We did trainings there, we did games, we did the whole shebang. Every quarter we did those trainings. And the good thing is that by doing that, like an investment of, let's say, 1 hour, 2 hours per month, the fact that you can convince a supervisory board member to tell you, what can I do to set this change in motion, that has big effect. Because one of the things I can still remember that from one of the supervisory board members, he said, why don't we come up with 5 things that this company needs to adhere to? And I was thinking, that's a good thing, because people can remember 5 things. And if these 5 things are, if we want to, and we at the top point, we had 136 projects running, well, basically nobody can run that. So if we can squeeze that to 5 must-haves that the board and the entire organization should do, it's easy to understand, and it's also measurable. And one of that was training. So over the 3 years, we trained 8,200 people only on cybersecurity. That's measurable because you can measure trainings.
Right.
Another thing what we did is that we built a technology called the lock chain, which is also a public reference case and a scientific research about on that. I'll put it in the link for the participants. And we made it mandatory that all applications are subject to that technology. Internally, it's called SECA, Security Administration, to administer all the security and risk processes. But to the outside world, we coined it the lock chain, because you lock the chain for your DevOps teams. When you have an engineering culture, you want to have security by design at the beginning, but then you also want to administer that. So those were 5 must-haves, but a predominant factor was indeed education, and it still is. The education that we also do is, for example, also to it, we give a lot of trainings and a lot of advisories in terms of what is zero trust, why should you have it, what is the big benefit, how can you reduce, for example, the cost of a breach by implementing zero trust. We did a lot of those things throughout the US, because we also now are heavily engaged in the Texas Banking Association to really train the community banks on what is zero trust, how can you develop your own roadmap, how can you utilize the technology, things like that. And it's also really appreciated, because then people own it themselves, rather than we or any other consulting firm that you pay money for it are going to do it for you. Because in the end, this is your new DNA. This is similar like finance. You need to understand finance because you run a business. And nowadays, you need to understand technology because you run technology. And then education becomes a big part of it.
So you had this three-year journey you worked on together, about 3 years,
Yeah.
working on this together. Maybe a simple question is what was the hardest thing? And what was the thing you're most proud of? Maybe we'll start with the hardest thing. What was the hardest thing in terms of either a project failure or some crisis or something that you had to obstacle that you had to overcome in this 3-year journey? What was that?
Wilco, what was your obstacle?
I suspect there were many.
Well, when you hip deep in execution, and people don't want to do what you think is needed, you sometimes get agitated, frustrated, upset, whatever we become, all those emotions then pass by. And trying to get a common ground on moving forward, getting out of the discussion that this is all about tools. Of course, tools are important, but it's not a tool the discussion. The technology discussion, technology is important because we talk about technology and security technology. But how do you collaboratively build that muscle to drive these very complex changes that you're doing? That requires, and that's difficult for everyone, including me, is to sometimes step out of everything you know and everything that you used to in moving forward. And when you said 136 projects, I think every reasonable organization has a lot of projects running, and no one everyone understands exactly how that works. Everyone is extremely busy with doing their thing. And when you come in and say, hey, wait a moment, we have that great initiative that helps our organization forward. And look, it has senior executive sponsorship, so it's important, you should do it. If people don't understand the change, that's my biggest takeaway. If they don't understand the change, if they cannot own it, if they don't have sort of belonging in that one, they fall back to what they know, because we humans are the result of what we have done in the past. We know what we've learned from the past, and we don't know what we don't know. So dealing with that uncertainty and building the bridges is extremely difficult, especially when these projects, because if you talk about projects, you talk about clear goals, fixed budgets, timelines that you're committed to. So that's very complex. And people often translate the inability to change as resistance. Of course, there's sometimes resistance, let's be honest, that sometimes it's the case. But most of the times, for me, it's not resistance, but it's the inability to build that bridge, to build the common understanding and see, hey, if you do this for me, it's beneficial for all of us. And I think that's universal. In every organization I work, this is the challenge when you do large disruptive change. And the zero trust implementation is a large disruptive change because you need to change the way you have been doing things until now. And this is where, well, let's label it resistance to change or inability to change is coming from, and that's definitely the most difficult thing. I didn't find the magic silver bullet yet to push through. And it's a hard work as a manager or a senior leader. It is incredibly difficult because these changes most of the times are not done in the span of time of a normal project, 6 months, 12 months. It takes 3-5 years of investment. So very persistent leadership on saying we'll move forward and also accept failure. Sometimes things just don't go as planned. And failure sometimes is the reason, see, I told you it's not working. That's where the difficulty is, in my opinion, and where you sometimes hit the brick wall. In the end, if you're persistent and keep believing in that ultimate way forward and try to bring people together, you can do these things. So,
from your perspective, Yuri, what was your biggest obstacle?
Well, I think my biggest obstacle, and I still see that for the last 20 years, and this is also my my research domain, is this entire tech regulation that we have, both in the US as well as in Europe. You see what the FTC and SEC are requiring from financial institutes and institutes in general, it's massive. Within an NN group, we needed to adhere to 21 regulations, 21, all with an average of 150 controls. So if you sum that up, and you have people doing that, and you sum up, okay, we have started also a bank, and the bank needs to adhere to anti-money laundering, know your customer, all these regulations, and it will become more and more and more. And so this, my biggest fear is this feed the machine obstacle. And we also saw that in NN. So I think that it's also the one thing that it is an obstacle, but on the other hand, it also provides an opportunity. The biggest obstacle here is that people believe in the traditional processes that worked 10 years ago still work nowadays. And so having Excel lists and doing checks on all these controls still work in today's world. Well, that doesn't make sense, because then you need to have what's currently happening at 10 to 20% of the workforce in large financial institutes are dealing with regulations. So they're basically overhead. You don't earn money with them. They basically cost you money. And to get rid of that, I think there's an important movement now. It's where you basically leverage on what you already have, use the technology to prove what you have. And so in case of Zero Trust, you have technical measures that demonstrate you can be compliant to these FTC rules. FTC rules, for example, require that you do east and solve verifications of users having access to those critical systems. Well, the technology is there. You can use that data, but you can use it for the FTC control. You can also use it for other controls in other domains. So making smart use of that. And I think then you also need a new generation of workforce. Not saying I'm also middle-aged white man, and I'm also in the same. I sometimes refer to the people that are stuck in their biases, but you need people that can clearly think, okay, how can I do this faster, better, and with more quality, like Wilco is mentioning. And if you have sufficient people around you to do that, then you're also able to make that change, because then people see you are contributing to the environment. And so if, to make that more explicit, within NN, we used the technology that I referred to in the blockchain to basically attract the people to want to use it, because it looks super, super fancy and people want to use it. That's one. And on the other hand, people were drawn to it because they saw, hey, there's something new that's really helping me in this feed the machine obstacle.
Mm-hmm. And that feed the machine situation where you have particularly financial institutions that are heavily regulated, where a lot of times you'll see the check the box process, and it's because there is the pressure to be able to demonstrate, or at least ostensibly demonstrate, that you're in compliance with the various regs. How do you get past that? How do you use that alignment where you're using these particular controls to support and demonstrate compliance with a particular financial reg, and also a particular, a different kind of regulation where they come together? Because it's interesting to me that lots of times you'll have so much not centralized with regard to demonstrating compliance, for example, with security, because somebody else in a different team may have, the information or the control or power over that control. And so I'm just interested in how you aligned that at such a large organization to sort of not continually be recreating the wheel.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, it's very difficult for an organization of that size to change that if the leadership doesn't really want to become a tech firm and are tech savvy in the highest ranks of the organization. Mm-hmm. Because then you can leverage on what technology can bring you. But if you don't see that, and you keep on acting in the old world, you keep on tossing the big burden of this bureaucracy with you. It's not going to fly. That's the main reason why smaller banks, smaller financial institutes are now uprising, because they are tech-born. They understand that they can test once a control and comply to many frameworks. And let's make this a little bit more tangible, because I think otherwise it remains a bit conceptual and philosophical a little bit. So the main reason for me, I was at NN, a large financial institute, and I was drawn to the fact that I had 4 SIEMs, security, information, event management, which we want to centralize. That was one movement. But then I encountered our CTO, Chief Technology Officer, Leo Jan Koning, had onto it, where basically the entire operation is automated and proved by fact that the control is actually working. And then I was thinking, hey, this is interesting, because now you can combine cybersecurity with compliance. And that's what we did over the last couple of years, where we basically built a technology where you use the technology logs of all these measures that you need to have in place for your cybersecurity. But in the same time, these controls can be reused for becoming compliant, not to one framework, but we now expanded our platform to 230 international frameworks that are out there, where you can basically map, okay, I'm now FTC, and now I need to do HIPAA, now I need to do CCPA in California, Privacy Act, for example. So PCI, you can map them all. And that's where we use technology, we use automation for it, we use a smart logical model, we use AI for it, but the machinery is there. And I think that's where you really can get rid of all the bureaucracy that's out there. And that's, I think, the biggest leap forward that we need to make now. Technology can do it, because the majority of the technology, in the pre-discussion, we talked about all the technology providers that can provide you with all that information. Is basically ingesting it, understanding what does this tell me, and then reporting back, okay, is this actually, for example, the identity and access management, ESOL verification that we traditionally do by hand. We look at lists, Excel lists. Well, you can basically now extract it from your identity and access management server, parse that to your control management, and you're there. And so there's also a paper about that, so I'll also share that, how we did that with Intuit, how we built that over the last couple of years. I see a question.
Did you ever have, I'm sorry.
We have a question from one of the people in the group. By the way, if you have questions, because I think we have 2 or 3 minutes left.
Right.
Put them in the Q&A. But I had a very good question, which I think also relates to what we did, Wilco. Is that there's a question with it. How was Zero Trust introduced at NN to the employees? I think it's a very relevant one, because in NN, this firm exists for 170 years, 170 years. That's a huge legacy in terms of cultural legacy. Everybody knows it. In Europe, everybody knows the company. It's very known. But it means that you also have a reputation. And that also means that from a board perspective, there was a lot of attention for corporate social responsibility, a whole factor about trust and integrity and things like that. So if you come in and you tell we're going to do zero trust, the board will tell you zero trust. We trust each other here. That's the basic fundamental of our firm. So we said, we're not going to mention zero trust. We're going to mention it modern security, in line with Wilco's project, modern workplace, so the modern security, and then data-centric security. So give it a more positive name, but inherently there were the zero trust principles, identifying protectors, identifying flows, designing measures, things like that, segmenting the network. Segmenting the network is not a principle, it's a measure. That's the difference. So you have 4 principles, 5 steps, and then 40 measures for the people that want to read it afterwards. We have the authentic zero trust guide by hand, but that's the biggest difference, because people mix that up.
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting question, because in the end, very technology and risk, security and compliance driven, the end user in the end doesn't care. The end user has a job to do, and they want to do it with as least as possible hurdles. And security often is a hurdle, because how many companies still have a VPN? You log into your system, username, password. The next thing you need to do is log into the VPN, username, password. Maybe you do MFA there. And before you can work, you already had to log in twice to your system. What we try to do is say, let's increase the security here, but also point out on the benefits of the technology we're doing. And what we've done in NN Group, but also in the current organization to a large group of users already, is we move to biometrical authentication. We get rid of the password. We can't get rid of it everywhere, but at least when the device is going on, we get rid of it. And we want to move towards a situation where they can just log in once and use the system as it is. And they suddenly say, hey, wait, this is way more efficient to get started and get my work going. And we're saying it's great because we actually raise the bar when it comes to security. So this is what we're trying to do. And this is also why we discuss with the tech vendors. It's like, yeah, nice, this security feature, but it's too complex to use, or it doesn't get adoption because people don't know how to use it. And yeah, you don't want to train your end users on becoming tech savvy and understanding which button to press to move forward. So this is where we try to do that. Technology nowadays gets more and more mature because experience. I think that COVID helped us a lot when moving people home. Because in the office you had less boundaries. Remember the boundary defense here and that we're coming from. A lot of these things and the improvements were required just to make sure that everyone could work from everywhere. And the technology vendors also have more eye for developing these capabilities and features to make things as smooth as possible. Is it perfect? No, there's no technology perfect, but I think if we look back 5 years ago and now, especially those experiences are very important. So for me, security and a user experience always go hand in hand. It should be like that.
It's so interesting from a security perspective, as we begin to wrap up, to think about zero trust and that culture of wanting to trust your workforce, and helping a CEO understand that, yes, we're doing multi-factor authentication, but there is no CEO on the internet. It's just a data packet. And that when we're looking at it from a security perspective, that's what we're looking at, and not the CEO. And it's interesting to be thought of as a human, that everything I do on the internet is really just data packets going here and there. And so it's kind of a fun thing, and certainly something that I learned more about when I started working remote during COVID. So we're going to be wrapping up now, and I don't know if you had any more questions there, but I thought I would just sort of end it with you maybe telling our participants what they could do next if they want to learn more about the zero trust strategies, if they want to learn more about our Ontoit platform, if they want to learn anything else, if you have any advice for them about how to begin their own zero trust journey.
Yeah. Shall I?
Yeah. Well,
I think it's what could be helpful is in any, let's say, journey going from A to B, is to understand, okay, what do I need and where can I leverage on? And so, you triggered me a little bit about the data packages. So one main question that we also ask to organizations is, are you going to invest yourself in the security capabilities and incident response capabilities? And I made a big matrix out of the entire security profession, and it identifies approximately 430 specific things that you should know if you build up a security function, which is quite complex. So if you don't have sufficient funds for it to do that, perhaps you want to outsource specific activities. That's one big thing. I call this the IKEA effect. IKEA means that means that if I'm going to build my own furniture, I'm going to assign myself to a specific profession that I have, but at some point I'm going to build bigger furnitures. Am I still having the capabilities? Well, many people, many organizations still think I can do that myself. You're starting to build, and you have too much self-confidence that you are actually capable of doing it. Then you need to make a harsh decision by yourself, my opinion. Am I really going to leverage on this? Am I really capable of building this expertise, or I'm going to outsource specifically? That's the main question. Then the other thing is that if you establish this roadmap from A to B and you want to leverage on things that you already have, then what we offer is a zero trust readiness assessment. There's a lot of information on that on our website, where you can basically, with our help, we determine, okay, what do you already have where you can leverage on? You don't want to invest too much additional money into new technology, but where can you leverage on? And what is the biggest burning platform? So what should you address immediately in order to avoid lateral movements, hack attacks, data leakage, etc. That's one, and where we basically develop a roadmap. Mm-hmm. It's a 2-day engagement where we basically do this. We've done this now many times for many organizations in several sizes. And the biggest benefit of that people actually refer to me is that they mention, okay, you guys really have eye of what we already have, but also have eye of what is capable for us to do ourselves, rather than to just give it to somebody that the expensive consultant needs to do that, because many expertise already internally in the organization. So that's one. We also have a lot of information and a lot of webinars coming up about what we call return on security investments. So if you are investing money in one specific security project, perhaps you're not able to investing that into another project because you're not most of the time your funds are unlimited. So and the return on security investment basically helps you prioritize projects where you really have the biggest bang for your buck. And that's an additional webinar that we provide. And obviously for the European listeners, we have a lot on European tech regulation, because there's now 11 new regulations coming out for the coming 2 years that companies need to implement, including AI Act, which is also here, the AI Act. But many additional tech regulations where we basically address how can you use Zero Trust to become more secure in your cybersecurity strategy, and at the same time also be compliant to all these new tech regulations.
Mm-hmm. And on our website, you'll find a whole bunch of white papers. Obviously, you'll have access to the list of webinars that are available. You will also be able to contact us if you have any further questions that you want to explore more in depth. So we encourage you to go to our website and find the particular things that you're interested in under resources is where you'll find a lot of that information. Yuri and Wilco, I just really want to thank you for sharing your stories today. It was fascinating. Thank you all for joining us today. And we look forward to your participation in our next webinar. Take care.